Hello, Mark. My name is Mary Chen Yinjun. I'm 47. I'm a freshman. The speech title is You're Harry. Everything you think you know about addiction is wrong. One of my earliest memories is of trying to wake up one of my relatives and not being able to. And I was just a little kid, so I didn't really understand why. But as I got older, I realized we had drug addiction in my family, including later cocaine addiction. I'd been thinking about it a lot lately, partly because it's not exactly 100 years since drugs were first banned in the United States and Britain, and we then imposed that on the rest of the world. It's a century since we made this really fateful decision to take addicts and punish them and make them suffer, because we believe that will deter them. It will give them an incentive to stop. And a few years ago, I was looking at some of the addicts in my life who I love, and trying to figure out if there was a sane way to help them. And I realized there were loads of incredibly basic questions I just didn't know the answer to, like what really causes addiction? Why do we carry on with this approach that doesn't seem to be working? And is there a better way out there that we could try instead? So I read lots of stuff about it, and I couldn't really find the answers I was looking for. So I thought, okay, I'll go and sit with different people around the world who live this and study this and talk to them and see if I could learn from them. And I didn't realize I would end up going over 30,000 miles at the start, but I ended up going and meeting loads of different people, from a transgender crack dealer in Bronx Valley, Brooklyn, to a scientist who spends a lot of time feeding hallucinogens to mongoose to see if they like them. It turns out they do, but only in very specific circumstances to the only country that's ever decriminalized all drugs, from cannabis to crack, Portugal. And the thing I realized that really blew my mind is almost everything we think we know about addiction is wrong. And if we start to absorb the new advance about addiction, I think we're going to have to change a lot more than our drug policies. But let's start with what we think we know, and what I thought I know. Let's think about this middle road here. Imagine all of you for 20 days now went off and used heroin 3 times a day. Some of you look a little more enthusiastic than others at this prospect. Laughter. Don't worry, it's just a thought experiment. Imagine you did that, right? What would happen? Now we have a story about what will happen that we've been told for a century. We think because there are chemical hoods in heroin, as you took it for a while, your body will become dependent on those hoods. You start to physically need them. And at the end of those 20 days, you are all been heroin addicts, right? That's what I thought. First thing that alerted me to the fact that something's not right with this story is when it was explained to me. If I step out of this tattoo today and I get hit by a car and I break my hip, I'll be taken to hospital and I'll be given lots of diamorphine. Diamorphine is heroin. It's actually more better heroin than you are going to buy on the streets, because the stuff you buy from a drug dealer is contaminated. Actually, very little of it is heroin, whereas the stuff you get from the doctor is medically pure, and you'll be given it for quite a long period of time. There are lots of people in this room. You may not realize it, You've taken quite a lot of heroin. And anyone who is watching this anywhere in the world, this is happening. And if what we believe about addiction is right, those people are exposed to those chemical hoods. What should happen? They should become addicts. This has been studied really carefully. It doesn't happen. You have noticed if your grandmother had a lip replacement, she didn't come out as a junkie. Laughter. And when I learned this, it seemed so weird to me, so contrary to everything I'd been told, everything I thought I knew. I just thought it couldn't be right until I met a man called Bruce Allister. He's a professor of psychology in Vancouver who carried out an incredible experiment I think really helps us to understand this issue. Professor Allister explained to me the idea of addiction we've all got in our heads. That story comes partly from a series of experiments that were done earlier in the 20th century. They're really simple. You can do them tonight at home if you feel a little sadistic. You get a rat and you put it in a cage, and you give it two water bottles. One is just water, and the other is water laced with either heroin or cocaine. If you do that, the rat will almost always prefer the drug water and almost always kill itself quite quickly. So there you go, right? That's how we think it works. In the 70s, Professor Allister comes along and he looks at this experiment and he noticed something. He said, "Oh, we're putting the rat in an empty cage. It's got nothing to do except use these drugs. Let's try something different." So Professor Allister built a cage that he called Rat Park, which is basically heaven for rats. They've got loads of cheese. They've got loads of colored balls. They've got loads of tunnels. Crucially, they've got loads of friends. They can have loads of sex, and they've got both the water bottles, the normal water, and the drug water. But here's the fascinating thing. In Red Park, they don't like the drug water. They almost never used it. None of them ever used it compulsively. None of them ever overdose. You go from almost 100% overdose when they are isolated to 0% overdose when they have happy and connected lives. Now, when he first saw this, Professor Allister thought, maybe this is just a thing about race. They are quite different to us, maybe not as different as we like. But fortunately there was a human experience into an exact same principle happening at the exact same time. It was called the Vietnam War. In Vietnam, 20% of all American troops were using loads of heroin. And if you look at the news reports from the time, they were really worried because they thought, my God, we are going to have hundreds of thousands of junkies on the streets of the United States when the war ends. It made total sense. Now those soldiers who were using loads of heroin were followed home. The Archives of General Psychiatry did a really detailed study. And what happened to them? It turns out they didn't go to rehab. They didn't go into withdrawal. 95% of them just stopped. Now, if you believe the story about chemical hoods, they might make absolutely no sense. But Professor Allister began to think there might be a different story about addiction. He said, what if addiction isn't about your chemical hoods? What if addiction is about your cage? What if addiction is an adaptation to your environment? Looking at this, There was another professor called Peter Johann in the Netherlands who said, maybe we shouldn't even call it addiction. Maybe we should call it bonding. Human beings have a natural and innate need to bond. And when we're happy and healthy, we'll bond and connect with each other. But if you can't do that because you are traumatized or isolated or beaten down by life, you will bond with something that will give you some sense of relief. Now they might be gambling, they might be pornography, they might be cocaine, that might be cannabis. But you will bond and connect with something that's because that's our nature. That's what we want as human beings. And at first, I found this quite a difficult thing to get my head around it. But one way that helped me to think about it is I can see I've got over by my seat a bottle of water, right? I'm looking at lots of you, and lots of you have bottles of water with you. Forget the drugs, forget the drug war, totally legally. All of those bottles of water could be bottles of vodka, right? We could all be getting drunk after this laughter. But we are not now because you've been able to afford the approximate gazillion pounds that it costs to get into a TED Talk. I'm guessing you guys could afford to be drinking vodka for the next 6 months. You won't end up homeless. You are not going to do that. And the reason you are not going to do that is not because anyone's stopping you. It's because you've got bonds and connections that you want to be present for. You got work you love. You got people you love. You got healthy relationships and a core part of addiction I came to think, and I believe the evidence suggests it's about not being able to bear to be present in your life. Now this has really significant implications. The most obvious implications are for the war on drugs. In Arizona, I went out with a group of women who were made to wear t-shirts saying, I was a drug addict, and go out on chain gangs and dig graves while members of the public drug at them. And when those women got out of prison, they are going to have criminal records that mean they'll never work in the legal economy again. Now that's a very extreme example of obviously in the case of the chain gang, but actually almost everywhere in the world we treat addicts to some degree like that. We punish them, we shame them, we give them criminal records, we put barriers between them reconnecting. There was a doctor in Canada, Dr. Gabriel Mate, an amazing man, who said to me, if you wanted to design a system that would make addiction worse, you would design that system. Now there's a place that decided to do the exact opposite, and I went there to see how it worked. In the year 20,000, Portugal had one of the worst drug problems in Europe. 1% of the population was addicted to heroin, which is kind of mind-blowing, and every year they try the American way more and more. They punish people and stigmatize them and shame them more. And every year the problem got worse. And one day the Prime Minister and the leader of the opposition got together and basically said, look, we can't go on with a country where we're having ever more people becoming heroin addicts. Let's set up a panel of scientists and doctors to figure out how we can solve the problem. And They set up a panel led by an amazing man called Dr. John Guller to look at all these new advances, and they came back and they said, decriminalize all drugs from the cannabis to crack, but, and this is the crucial next step, take all the money we used to spend on cutting addicts off, on disconnecting them and spending instead on reconnecting them with society. And that's not really what we think of as drug treatment in the United States and Britain. So they do resident rehab, they do psychological therapy. That does sound value, but the biggest thing they did was the complete opposite of what we do. A massive program of job creation for addicts and microloans for addicts to set up small business and so that you used to be a mechanic. When you're ready, they'll go to a garage and they'll say, if you employ this guy for a year, we'll pay half his wages. The goal was to make sure that every addict in Portugal had something to get out of bed in the morning. And when I went and met the addicts in Portugal, what they said is, as they rediscover purpose, they rediscover bonds and relationships with the wider society. It'll be 15 years this year since that experience began, and the results are in. Injecting drug use is down in Portugal, according to the British Journal of Criminology, by 50%, 50%. Overdose is a massive down. HIV is massively down among addicts. Addiction in every study is significant down. One of the ways you know it works so well is that almost nobody in Portugal wants to go back to the old system. Now there's the political implications. I actually think there's a layer of implications to all this research below that. We live in a culture where people feel really increasingly vulnerable to all sorts of addictions, whether it's to their smartphones or to shopping or to eating. Before these talks began, you guys know this. We are told we weren't allowed to have our smartphones on, and I have to say, a lot of you looked an awful lot like addicts who were told their dealer was going to be unavailable for the next couple of hours. Laughter. A lot of us feel like that, and it might sound weird to say, I've been talking about how disconnection is a major driver of addiction, and weird to say it's growing, because you think we are the most connected society that's ever been, surely. But I increasingly began to think that the connections we have and all think we have are like a kind of parody of human connection. If you have a crisis in your life, you'll notice something. It won't be your Twitter followers who come to stay with you. It won't be your Facebook friends who help you turn it around. It'll be your flesh and blood friends who you have deep and nuanced and textured, face-to-face relationships with. And that's a study I learned about from Bill McComber, the environmental writer that I think tells us a lot about this. It looked at the number of close friends the average American believes they can call on in a crisis. That number has been declining steadily since the 1950s. The amount of floor space an individual has in their home has been steadily increasing, and I think that's like a metaphor for the choice we've made as a culture. We've traded floor space for friends, we've traded stuff for connections, and the result is we are one of the loneliest societies there has ever been. And Bruce Allister, the guy who did the red park experiment, says, "We talk all the time in addition about individual recovery. And it's right to talk about that, but we need to talk much more about the social recovery. Something gone wrong with us, not just with individuals, but as a group. And we've created a society where, for a lot of us, life looks a whole lot more like less isolated cash and a whole lot less like Red Park. If I'm honest, this isn't why I went into it. I didn't go into the discover the political stuff, the social stuff. I wanted to know how to help the people I love. And when I came back from this long journey and I learned all this, I look at the addicts in my life and you're really candid. It's hard loving and ended. And there's going to be lots of people who know in this room. You're angry a lot of the time, and I think one of the reasons why this debate is so charged is because it runs through the heart of each of us, right? Everyone has a bit of land that looks at an addict and thinks, "I wish someone would just stop you." And the kind of scripts we're taught for how to deal with the addicts in our lives is typified by, I think, the reality show Intervention. If you guys have ever seen it, I think everything in our lives is defined by reality TV. But that's another TED Talk. If you've ever seen the show Intervention, it's a pretty simple premise. Get and edit all the people in their life, gather them together, confront them with what they're doing, and they say, "If you don't shut up, we're going to cut you off." So what they do is they take the connection to the addict and they surround it, they make it contingent on the addict behaving the way they want. And I began to see why that approach doesn't work, and I began to think that almost like the importing of the larger of the junk world into our private lives. So I was thinking, how could I be progress? And what I've tried to do now, and I can't tell you I do it consistently, and I can't tell you it's easy, is to say to the addicts in my life that I want to deepen the connection with them, to say to them, "I love you whether you are using or you're not. I love you, whatever state you are in. And if you need me, I'll come and stay with you because I love you. And I don't want you to be alone or to feel alone." And I think the core of that message, "You are not alone, we love you," has to be at every level of how we respond to addicts, socially, particularly, and individually. For 100 years now, we have been singing word songs about addicts. I think all along we should have been singing love songs to them, because the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. Thank you. Applause.